Hey, 42 here. There's something about the experimental nature of science that attracts the crazies. You just won't believe what despicable, weird and downright evil things these pioneers of the bizarre have done. Sergey Bryukhanenko was a Soviet scientist and head of the Research Institute of Experimental Surgery during the Stalin era. Now that's a recipe for a mad scientist if ever I heard one. Sergey was the inventor of the first artificial heart machine, which he called the autojector. Its main purpose was to sustain life through artificial means. It was used to help perform the first Soviet open heart surgery. Seems to be going pretty well so far, doesn't it? Well, this is the bit where it goes weird. Sergey was obsessed with mutilating animals, then seeing how long he could keep their dismembered heads alive. His laboratory was filled with dead, mostly headless, dogs. I told you it gets weird. Sergey's most infamous experiment was documented on video, and it involved decapitating a dog, which he then placed on a table. Sergey then managed to bring the head back to life using his homemade life support machine. The severed dog's head was fully responsive and it even accepted a treat from the staff. The original recording of the experiment can be found on the internet, but I should warn you, it's not for the faint-hearted. During World War II, thousands of human experiments were carried out by Nazi scientists under Hitler's instruction. The goal of these experiments was to discover new ways to aid German military personnel whom had been injured during combat, and also to discover radical new medical treatments to advance Hitler's ideology. The leader of these experiments was Dr. Joseph Mengele, who earned himself the nickname the Angel of Death for the atrocities he carried out. When new inmates arrived at Auschwitz, Mengele would select which were to be gassed and which would be taken to the laboratory to conduct his inhumane experiments on. Joseph Mengele was obsessed by twins. He would often attempt to stitch the flesh, blood vessels and organs of twins together in an attempt to create Siamese twins. But his subjects often contracted gangrene and died after a couple of days of unimaginable pain. Joseph performed experiments such as putting victims into pressure chambers, castration, freezing subjects to death, removal of organs and limbs, and even performing sex change operations. Most of the victims were murdered following the experiment, if they didn't straight up die from the experiment, that is. During the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army set up a covert biological and chemical research and development base called Unit 731. They told the locals it was a water treatment plant, but that guys must have fallen apart pretty quickly once the locals realised that the screams of tortured humans sound remarkably different than running water. Microbiologist and medical officer Shiro Ishii was the director of Unit 731. He committed numerous atrocities at Unit 731 in the name of science, including vivisection on living people without anaesthetic, including pregnant women, dismembering people's limbs and reattaching them to other parts of their bodies, injecting subjects with deadly diseases to study the effects, and even used people as live test targets for grenades and flamethrowers. However, after the war ended, Shiro Ishii never spent any time in jail for his atrocities because he was granted immunity by the US government. Some believe this is because the US made a pact with Japan during the war to help cover up Unit 731 in exchange for medical knowledge of their findings. At number 4 is Sidney Gottlieb, but he had possibly the coolest alias of all the evil scientists. His colleagues referred to him as Dr. Feelgood. He was an American military psychiatrist with a PhD in chemistry. During the Cold War, the CIA hired him to help develop biological weapons and poisons to help use against the Russians. But Gottlieb's only answer to taking out America's enemies was to poison them all. Gottlieb proposed the idea of killing Fidel Castro with either a poisoned cigar, a poisoned fountain pen, or a poisoned wetsuit, whichever was easiest. It turns out none was the answer, since he's still alive. Gottlieb's other unsuccessful poisoning attempts included an Iraqi general and the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But that's just a tip of Sidney Gottlieb's weird iceberg. He was also the head of the MKUltra project, which studied the possibility of using LSD to mind control one's enemies. They were interested if the psychedelic drug could be used to break a person's mind for the purpose of interrogation. So Gottlieb and his colleagues spent a large portion of their time getting high on acid, but they soon realised they would need test subjects other than themselves. However, instead of inviting willing subjects to get high on LSD, Gottlieb instead travelled around America slipping LSD into people's drinks and observing the effects. He mainly targeted prostitutes and drug addicts. Next up is American psychologist Harlow. He had the nickname of Monkey Torturer. You just know that this guy qualifies for this video with a name like that. He was obsessed with finding out what is love. And for some unknown reason, he decided the best way to do that was by torturing baby monkeys. Yes, that's right, baby monkeys. To achieve his goal, Harlow invented a range of monkey torturing devices. One of his most infamous he lovingly referred to as the rape rack. Harlow would use his rape rack device to force monkeys to mate. He also had a device he called the Iron Maiden, but perhaps his most controversial experiment was called the Pit of Despair. Harlow would place a baby monkey in a small isolated chamber for up to a year, without any contact with another living creature. As a result, the monkeys all became psychotic and never recovered. Thanks for the view, subscribe for more 42.